Thank you. Sounds like a very esteemed career. And through that time, which is now 15 to 20 years, I've been surrounded by report cards, environmental report cards, and I've seen how successful they can be at communicating science and educating people in terms of the government, industry, and the public about environmental science. So I'm always sort of reflecting on how can we make these environmental report cards more interesting, more relevant, because they come out every year and over time they can become a bit stagnant. And so I thought, well, let's look back at, we base these report cards on school report cards, which we're all familiar with and have a connection to. And I thought, well, perhaps there's a lot of research going on in the school report card field. What can we learn from that scope of research that's been done that we can apply to environmental health report cards? So we'll sort of backtrack a bit and just talk about why are environmental or ecosystem health report cards effective. And there's three main reasons. The first is that they're very good at delivery of information. So they're very simple and concise. Most people can relate to the scoring system of A to F, and more importantly, you don't need that much instructions on how to interpret what's being presented. The second one is the effect that they have. They're very powerful at identifying areas that need more improvement, and they can also provide a mechanism to track changes in the environment over time, particularly in response to management actions that have happened or money that's been spent. And thirdly, there's often a very good response to report cards. So firstly, it provides incentive for this location to do better than that location, and why is this location doing better than this location. It provides accountability both from the government doing the monitoring and also those that are doing the management response. And lastly, the mass media love this sort of simplified version of science that they can communicate through the TV and the newspapers and so forth. So, in terms of continuing this retrospective and what I've seen with the report cards, so here's the Chesapeake Bay report card. We have a cover, we have some methodology, indicators, the grades, and then commentary surrounding why those grades are the way they are. And this technique of delivering information has been well received and it's influential. It's comprehensive in terms of it goes beyond just providing grades. There's always a story associated with the delivery of those grades. They're visually appealing, so often lots of colour, lots of imagery, so it's actually attractive to pick up off the table, so people like the look of them. Being local and having grades that are relatively local provides a sense of ownership for the public, the government and so forth. And lastly, they really can act as a really great educational tool for a particular message. So you'll often find that a report card will come out, even though it's a similar structure each year, there'll often be a component in the back about what you can do to help the environment. Okay? But as I said, there's this issue of report card, what we call report card fatigue. So this is report cards from Moreton Bay in Australia, and it's been going on there since around 2000. And they come out every year, and you can see they've gotten sexier as time has gone on, and as the graphic artists and people have been putting money into them. But you can see for the first 8 years, it was pretty much hovering around B- for the Bay as a whole. So you can see how that can become potentially a bit boring, and so it loses its flair every year. Mind you, this is 8 years of development that's been going on in this particular ecosystem. There's 5,000 people moving here every week. So to be able to maintain that score in terms of that pressure was a feat in itself. Then there was a flood, and then we got some serious changes for the worst. So all those management actions that have been occurring through this time, you get one flood and you get a D grade, and you can imagine the response to that. But you're able to see that it was able to rebound and showed some resilience. And so there is this gradual change. There's a very large reticence to change any of the indicators. So over time, as issues in your waterway or ecosystem change, you want to change your indicators, but the minute you change your indicators, it starts affecting the score in terms of its tracking. So there's a real complexity around altering the indicators that you're using. Typically it's a year late, so you're reporting on the past year. And in terms of, if we start thinking about report cards in schools, school report cards, at what stage does this process actually graduate from school? If you look at Chesapeake Bay, which has had a shorter stint of report cards, first one officially came out in 2006, and it's been hovering around that C, D+ throughout that time. So, I started the process of doing some research into school report cards and what can they tell us. And if you, Google has this tool which is called the Ngram viewer, where it searches for the use of words in books and literature over time. So the white line here is school report cards, and the green line here is environmental report cards. Okay, so you can see that around 1940s there was a spike in environmental school report cards, and this is around the time when the traditional report cards as we know it, A's to F's, came sort of into being. And then more recently there's been another spike in school report cards, and I'm not sure whether that's, well, actually it was in the early 80s, and I think the reason for that was that school scores had a much larger role in college admission, right? So there was a lot more emphasis on school report cards. Plus there were report cards coming out on the performance of schools, right? So there's this sort of range. But you can see environmental report cards sort of started around the early 80s, and they're slowly growing in popularity over time. I think I added, if we look at, in terms of the popularity of report cards, we're getting economic report cards taking off, and health report cards, particularly in our hospitals, as we hold them more and more accountable. So they're becoming quite trendy. And if we were to, so part of my research was like Googling school report cards and where did they start. So if we go back in history, before, report cards were really prominent at Sunday schools, like, did you know how many scriptures can you say off the top of your tongue, and trades at the time, were you actually qualified or weren't you qualified? And it was only until the early 1800s at Harvard is where I found the first sort of signs of report cards coming out. And you would get a score of 0 to 8 each day of your degree. And a perfect score at the end of your degree was 17,000. And it was based on the number of recitations of information that you could remember. And Henry D. Thoreau, the famous abolitionist and the nature lover, he was at the university at that time, and it was about 10 years in, he graduated with a score of 12,000, and he put up a massive stink and said it wasn't representative of his capabilities, and then the university dismissed him and said he was a troublemaker. So that's the first sort of records I found. And it was the early 1900s where we had this pass and fail sort of system where you either were competent in a field or you were not. Right? So that was kind of that trade. Are you a plumber or are you not a plumber? So you sort of get yes or no. And then in the 40s we start to see the report cards as we know them now. So we get the A's to F's. And at the time it was not only on your academic ability, it was on your hygiene and how you sat straight in the seat. But also what was interesting at this time was there was advertising on the report cards, right? And they probably supplied the material and the printing for the report cards, which is something that we could contemplate now in terms of funding models for the ongoing report cards. See how that would go down. And then in the 1980s, the dot matrix printer came into fore, and we started getting report cards printed out. In 2000, we start to see the online report cards. And what I want to show here is that there is, from here, there's been this reduction in the personalisation of report cards. So here there were comments written, teachers would sign it off, and here you just get your percentage score and so forth. And so there's been this depersonalisation, if that's the correct term, of report cards over time. And more recently now, there's this move towards standards-based reporting where it sort of takes away the ambiguity between schools and between teachers and so forth. All right, so what did I find in terms of research in the success of these report cards? So these guys, Mazzano and Dyke, found out that, well, they concluded that report cards were antiquated and subjective yet entrenched, because the minute the school would try and change a report card to provide more information, the parents would get upset. Right? They liked the A to F. Highly ineffective. They found that interest in learning itself was diminished. There was a preference for easier tasks, so students would take shortcuts to get the grade. Students would forget what they've learnt more quickly when grades were involved, and the overall finding that there's little or no research to support their continuation. So I was like, oh, that's not boding well with me in terms of advancing our ecosystem health report cards. But what they did recommend was that we move towards a standards-based approach for testing and reporting. Knowing what the goal is helps. Students need to be assessed by their many sub-elements. Both performance and progress needs to be reported. Increased transparency in the methodology. Greater discussion of results between students and parents, and real-time information, and even discussion about weighting scores based on the priorities of that subject. Right? So this is all great, but it's a hell of a lot of work for a school teacher to do for every student. Right? So you can see why a lot of these haven't been adopted. So the question then to me was, so who needs to learn from who? Here am I trying to learn from the school report cards what we can apply here, when in fact it's potentially the other way. We already present the standards and methodologies that are being used. We talk about the performance, we talk about the progress, and so forth. So just to, so in terms of battling this report card fatigue, I think we've got the actual approach of delivering and the content of report cards at a more advanced stage than school report cards have been. But in terms of this report card fatigue, how can we manage that? Well, there's a few ideas that have come that are actually in place now. So you notice that the Chesapeake Bay report card now has a photo competition each year, and people submit photos, and there's a winner, and they get their photo on the front cover. Right? So it's great stimulus and provides a renewed interest each year in the report card. Perhaps we can start asking users what they want to learn and see in the report cards each year. Usually it's a one-way delivery, but perhaps that student-teacher-parent interaction, maybe we should be also having a questionnaire or a contest to see what people want to learn about their ecosystem that year. Perhaps we should be capturing the comments from all parties. So at the moment, there's a lot of, if there's any commentary surrounding the grades, they're typically done by the scientists. Perhaps we should be getting the information from the managers and the public in there, so that perhaps, rather than, so we can see what the manager's perspective is in terms of improving the grades and so forth. And lastly, integrating citizen science. So if we want to keep this popular and alive, perhaps getting citizen scientists involved would stimulate interest in the report card. All right, I think that's it. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.